All right, I think we've got it. Haha. It says I'm live. All right. Sorry for the technical difficulties. It just kept circling and circling and circling and took its time reloading and all that. So, thank you for joining us this morning. Thank you. Welcome. I'm glad to be here with you. I'm glad you're here with me. Um, we've got some wonderful things here we're going to be covering. This is the last Parasha. This is the last portion of the book of Exodus, the book of Shemot. And we are um, going to. And so, sorry about that. So here we are, here we're going, and we're going to get right into this because we've got lots going on here. It's so good to see some folks on here, and uh, and so good. So here we go. So let's start with the blessing. Um, Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who has sanctified us with his commandments and has commanded us to engross ourselves in the words of Torah. Please, Lord our God, sweeten the words of Torah in our mouth and in the mouth of your people and the family of Israel. May we and our offspring and the offspring of your people, the house of Israel, all of us know your name and study your Torah for its own sake. Blessed are you, Lord, who teaches Torah to his people Israel. Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who selected us from all the peoples and gave us his Torah. Blessed are you, Lord, giver of the Torah. And we are going to have some sweet words of Torah here today. Parasha Pedukei is means accountings or reckonings, and um, just kind of a reminder what we do here. We follow the same process that's been followed since the day of Moses, of weekly readings, reading and studying the Torah throughout the week, and then getting together on Shabbat Shalom, by the way, and we go over them. We study because we want to. When we study the Word of God, we hear from God, and so that's what we do here. And just we also just learn some Torah basics as we go along. Remember, Torah basically means instruction. So we are getting our instructions from God. And I see we had a couple more subscribers. Thank you for subscribing, and hopefully we'll continue to grow with these. And like and share, hit the like button, and all that kind of stuff. You know what to do. Kind of like the answering machine when somebody, it's like you hear the beep. You know what to do. Anyway, so these are the countings or the amounts of. These are the reckonings of the tabernacle of testimony. We are in Exodus chapter 38, and this starts with verse 21. These are the reckonings of the tabernacle of testimony, which were reckoned at Moses' bidding. So, like we said here, so this is the amounts of. And so what's going on here, there seems to be a transparency going on here. Moses was not only considered the most humble man on earth, but he was also considered to be very transparent. He didn't want any problems. And so there was an accounting of all the silver and all the gold and everything so that the people knew exactly what was being used for what. And that should say something for us today. So um, if an organization is receiving funds, they should tell the people, here's what we're doing with those funds. Here's exactly what's going on with all that. But that's just kind of like a lot of people don't concern themselves with that kind of stuff. But it can be very important. It's a very important subject. There's a lot of God has a lot of meticulous planning that goes on. And you'll notice that there's a lot of detail. You can almost say that God is somewhat OCD or CDO because it has to be in alphabetical order. But what we have here is, everything has to be just right. And there's a lot of this, and a lot of people seem to kind of suffer with, or struggle with, I should say, on how to be just right, how to get things just right. You don't have to stress yourself over those things, but we don't give up on trying to do the right things, of course. So uh, there's one thing that I wanted to share um, that I received from Rabbi Friedman, and he sent me about uh, something about this Parasha that Rabbi Jonathan Sacks. I love Rabbi Jonathan Sacks. It's sad that he passed away. May his memory always be for a blessing. He was very well known. He was the former chief rabbi to the United Kingdom, and he was very well known, excellent speaker, traveled around all over the place speaking in colleges and universities and uh, other important organizations and things like that. But he was addressing a room packed with students. Why is it, he asked, that there are only 31 verses in the Torah to describe the entirety of the act of creation by God, and yet when it comes to describing the building of the tabernacle, it goes on and on for hundreds of verses. For the last 3 Torah portions, we have been reading the blueprints for building the tabernacle, and now in the Torah portion, Pekudei, the building process itself is described in this. Is this necessary? Honestly, it seems redundant and somewhat boring. You know, it's a lot of people do. They read this stuff and it seems, wow, it seems boring, but this is why we dig into the Torah. We're looking for these nuggets and these things. We can see these things. Rabbi Sacks, he explained that it is nothing for God, an infinite being, to create a home for man, but it's quite another thing for man to create a home for God, especially when this holy building project followed on the heels of the sin of the golden calf. And the sin of the golden calf is especially egregious and puzzling since it followed on the heels of the revelation of the 10 Commandments at Mount Sinai. Any relationship can be sparked by infatuation. It's easy to get caught up in a moment of intense feelings, but for a relationship to endure, one has to relish and savor it day after day, week after week, month after month. In tasking us with the building of the tabernacle, where we did ordinary tasks repeatedly for a prolonged period of time, God was teaching us a lesson about the real nature of love. More so, in discussing the tabernacle, what we've been doing, there is an unusual statement made. We read this in the Torah portion, Teruma, which was a few ago, where it says, "Make for me a sanctuary, and I will dwell amongst them." The commentaries explain that the tabernacle must be built within each and every one of us. Remember, we talked about building our tabernacle, and today we're talking about inaugurating our tabernacle. So, we must create a home that is welcome, open, and loving for our Creator. We must make a home for godliness in our individual lives, for when one feels at home, and in this case, when the one, he's talking about, Rabbi Sacks is talking about God, feels at home, that is the greatest expression of love. I talked about a little bit about this in a video just recently about give them God. So another allusion to this, as Rabbi Sacks goes on, is the fact that the Torah begins with the letter Beit, which also can be read as the word Beit, meaning house. This shows us that the reason we were created was to create a home, a dwelling place for God in this world, and a place where others can feel at home as well. To do so requires constant work and focus. To make a house a home, we need it inviting and welcoming for others. We want a home filled with love and light. And with that in mind, thinking about this, Rabbi Sacks talks about the home being built, and then it starts with the letter Beit, Beit house, and then you have what was going on in the creation is that God created light before he created the sun and the moon to provide light. So there was light before that, when that's the light of the Messiah. And that light of the Messiah is what we get in us and we shed outwards. And it begins in our home. It all connects, doesn't it? It's so wonderful. It's so great. I just love that kind of stuff. So continuing on now, these let's see here. So now the tabernacle and its individual parts, there is such an awesome holiness to it, so to speak. And and what's interesting is I don't know if you've ever wondered, but what happened with the tabernacle? I mean, it has to. Where is it? I mean, you don't really read much about, I mean, the tabernacle moved around with them, and then it just kind of got packed up, and then later on the temple was built. So whatever happened to the tabernacle? Well, what's interesting about the tabernacle is, so just like the children of Israel went through the wilderness, and their clothes and their shoes never wore out, the tabernacle never wore out either. It was this special holy. It was, as a matter of fact, it was considered more holy than the first and the second temple itself, because those they wore down after usage. They were destroyed. But where is that tabernacle? And that's one of those mysteries. You always kind of wonder, is it still in existence? It's hard to say. And so this is one of those wonderful things. Now, back to our verses. These are talking about the verses talking about what is being reckoning here and what is being devoted into the building of God. And what it's basically talking about is that when we invest in what God wants us to invest in, it produces not only just holiness, but it produces blessing and glorifies God. And we've heard Yeshua, we've heard Jesus. When you read about lay not up for yourself earthly treasure, because it just becomes it's worthless. Money is worthless for people to sit there and count. Remember the cartoon Scrooge McDuck, where he's swimming around in all of his money, counting it and everything. It's worthless. It's a waste of time. So, and these are the reckonings of the tabernacle of testimony. Now, why does it say the tabernacle of testimony? And so what we have to understand here is that there's a repetition, and the word tabernacle, it includes everything, the vessels and everything that was inside of it, all of its entirety. That is the tabernacle. But then on the inside, you also have the ark, which holds the tabernacle of testimonies, and it had a vestment that was draped over it, like a little tabernacle, like a little tent. We'll talk a little bit more about this tallit that I'm wearing, time permitting. I know you're anxious. And so what we have here is that this is also the mention of two tabernacles is also an allusion to that there was a tabernacle on earth, and also it was based on the tabernacle that is in heaven. Let me continue on here. Verse number 22. Bezalel, son of Uri, son of Hur, of the tribe of Judah, did everything that the Lord commanded Moses. Now, if you saw HP post, you'll notice that Bezalel was, when he was selected for this holy purpose, he was 13 years old, which is an amazing thing. It's an amazing thing that some young people can be blessed so much. We even see it in the world today. There's just some young people, they're just like, wow, I'm 13 and wow, you're in college? Wow, okay, yeah. There's just amazing things like that. So excuse me, sorry about that. Let's see. Okay, so where I was reading, that's what I was doing. Forgive me. Oh, and he was also the grandson of Miriam. That's what it was. That's what I was trying to remember. And he did everything that the Lord commanded Moses. With him was Oholiab, son of Ahishmach, and the tribe of Dan, a carver, weaver, and embroiderer with turquoise, purple, scarlet wool, and with linen. So you've got some amazing things going on with silver and gold and linen and investments and all these things going on. And so um, this is an amazing thing. So one of the things my wife, she had told me this story. I think she had sent it to me. There was a story of there was somebody that was, oh yeah, they were somewhere, and there was this millionaire. He said he was going to give $1 million. Everyone was standing around this pool. The pool was full of crocodiles, and he said he was going to give $1 million to somebody that would swim across the pool. And all of a sudden, there was a splash, and this man frantically swimming across, and he makes it to the other side, and the millionaire's like, wow, I didn't think anybody would even brave to do this. He's like, how do you want me to give you the money? And he's like, you can keep your money. I just want to find out who pushed me. So sometimes we drastic things happen and just crazy things happen. So what we have here in Parasha Pedukei is that we're wrapping up everything in the book of Exodus, and it's all the detailed events that are happening with the inauguration of the temple, and all of the many parts and all the many pieces that we've been learning about over the week. And one of these I'm going to go back to and talk about in a little bit. So now what we have here is going on is that with the structure, later on we read the structure is put up, and Moses turns his attention to the courtyard. Moses takes care of this at this point and not Aaron, because he's demonstrating. Plus, he is also considered a king and a priest himself. So, like Messiah, he's leading the way and setting an example for the rest of us, the rest of the people, to know exactly how they're supposed to be um, erecting their tabernacle and doing everything and inaugurating their temple, all of that. So we learn how to do that. So he turns his attention to in this courtyard, that's the busiest part of the tabernacle. That is where the altar and the laver and all the other things, it's where everything was there. That's where all the sacrifices happened. And he's doing these sacrifices, and only after he demonstrates what is going on that as we read, he starts to erect the things up around it, basically kind of concealing what is going on. We read that the altar of the burnt offering he placed in front of the entrance of the Mishkan. Mishkan is the Hebrew word for tabernacle, of the tent of meeting, and he offered up the burnt offering. He set up the courtyard all around the Mishkan and the altar, and he put up the screen at the entrance to the courtyard, and Moses completed the work. So you can see here, he did that, and then he erected afterwards. And so essentially Moses was kind of doing things backwards. First, he put up the inside, and only thereafter, did he erect the outer enclosure. So that's kind of like I go and I find a piece of land, and I grab a piece of land, and then I set my bed out there, and then I sleep on my bed, and I start building it around me. It seems kind of odd to do it that way. That's really not how it's normally done. It seems like it's out of order. So why did Moses do it this way? As a matter of fact, according to Midrash, Bezalel even said, why are we building the ark before we're building the tabernacle? Why are we doing things like this? And so it's because it's common practice to make a house and then put the furniture in it, right? So, but common practice isn't always common. And that's where the answer. So Bezalel was right. That's the common practice dictates the structure first, and then the content second, right? So the thing is so what is common practice? So what was Moses trying to bypass? What was he trying to show us? So he was going backwards. He jumped right into some intense stuff that was going on. And what we had to understand here is that sometimes you have to just go and do those things, and then later on those things. So it's kind of like when we teach our children, I'll admit here, you want some transparency in raising our children. Sometimes we let them make decisions for themselves, and that wasn't always the best idea. the best idea is to, I know this sounds kind of strange, but to go ahead and kind of overload them with information, hoping that some of that information sticks. Because when they're young, they're kind of like Jello, which isn't kosher, and but as Rush Limbaugh talks about it, but their minds full of mush, and you got to throw stuff in there, and then the fruit, and then like if you make Jello and you put fruit in there, and then it hardens. So you got to get stuff in there before the Jello hardens. So that's what's going on here. So it's kind of an information overload. So you kind of have to just jump in there and to learn. And so that's exactly what's going on here. Now, so there was more of an inverted construction. So let's jump to chapter 39. We're doing all right on time. I just want to make sure. Now, in chapter 39, it talks about from the turquoise, purple, and scarlet wool, they made knit vestments to serve in the sanctuary, and they made the holy vestments for Aaron as the Lord had commanded Moses. Again, we're talking about vestments. And then when we go to verse number 3, verse number 3 says, they hammered out the thin sheets of gold and cut threads to work the weaver's craft to the turquoise, into the purple, into the scarlet wool, and into the linen. So this is an amazing thing if you think about it. They hammered this out, and they cut it into thin little strips, and they weaved it into the fabric of the vestments, of the vestments that go over, like the covering over the ark. And so there was the gold weaved into it. And that's just an amazing craftsmanship to me, that I think, and when we think about God being a craftsman, he's the master craftsman. And that reminds me right now of a story. I'll chase a little bit of a rabbit, but when we look at the life of Yeshua, we see that it says that he was the son of a carpenter. Well, that word really is talking about being a craftsman. And actually, in that area that he grew up, there really isn't many trees. There's hardly any trees at all. So really, it was more like stone. So he may have been a stone worker, which is kind of cool because, he is the rock. And so he's the son of a craftsman, and God is the great craftsman. That was extra. That was bonus. And so that brings me to what I wanted to talk a little bit about. Not quite to the talit yet, but we're going to go backwards just a little bit, and we're going to talk about the golden zeets. So you're like, what is the golden zeets? Well, the golden zeets is, well, let's read what it's talking about. Well, so we go back in the high priest, the Kohen Gadol. The Kohen Gadol is the Hebrew for the high priest, and he wore 8 garments. And these 8 garments, and they were accessories, and it was what he had on when he served in the holy temple. And so, like most commonly, everybody refers to the choshen, the breastplate. It had the tribes of Israel and gems on the front, on the ephod strapped on the front. And so that is kind of a more familiar thing that people study on and learn about. But I wanted to talk a little bit about the little lesser known ones, and that is the zeets. And so the zeets is like it was communicated to God or to Moses by God as to what the zeets is. And so when we read about it, and this is how it's described: make a plate is zeets, of pure gold, and engrave on it a seal, holy to God. Place it upon a blue thread, so that it will be on the turban. It shall be opposite the front of the turban. It will be on Aaron's forehead. And Aaron will absolve the guilt of the holy things which the children of Israel sanctify, all of their holy offerings. It shall be on his forehead constantly for their acceptance before God. Okay, so this seems kind of like whoa, what's going on here? This is another one of those things, was why we dig into Uh, that's right, cornerstone. Good one. The stone, the med stone. So anyway, so this is another one of these reasons why we look into rabbinic writings, because we don't know exactly all the details as to what's going on right here. As a matter of fact, people seem to get kind of upset when you even mention Talmud or anything like that. But in reality, if we didn't have that, you know what, we wouldn't know how weddings are performed today. Everybody wants to have a wonderful wedding, but we'd still be in the age where a man just went and took a woman and that was it. Okay, but thanks to rabbinical writings, we know how to do a marriage. So the zitz was this ornament that this ornament, what I'm talking about, an ornament, is that it was similar to what a lot of dignitaries and important people of those day and age, what they would have on them. And as a matter of fact, he's Exodus 39 and 30 and Leviticus 8 and 9, they both talk about it, and they call it it's called a Nezer HaKadosh. And so, in other words, it's a holy diadem or a tiara, so to speak, like a crown. Psalms 132 and 18 talks about it, uses the words, on him is his tiara, Nezer, and that Nezer will shine, and Yatzitz. So gold shines, right? So, okay. So the high priest, it had that, it was a gold band, it was across his forehead, and it had the words holy to God. They were inscribed on there. And it was hammered out. It was hammered out. And let's see, wait a second. No, I'm sorry. Let me drop back to the wrong notes. Let me turn the page of my notes here. And so it had the letters holy to God on the little golden plate, and they rose out like the words on a coin would be. They lift up off of they protrude. That's the word I'm looking for. They protrude out like the letters and the words on a coin. And so, and there was one or more strings of sky blue wool, kind of this color. And one or more strings is anywhere from, commentators, there's like anywhere from 1 to 3 to 4, somewhere around in there. But they were threaded through the holes of the band and they were placed onto the high priest's turban, his mitznefet, and they were tied in the back of his head to hold the zitz in place. Now, what is the purpose of this? And this, again, this is where we're looking to rabbinical writings to find out some of what this going on. So the verses quoted by Aaron here, quoted above, state that Aaron, he uses the zitz to absolve the guilt of holy things. Now, Rashi goes on to explain that the offerings in the temple had to be brought in a state of ritual purity. If either the offering itself or the Kohen, the priest performing the service, was impure, then the offering would be disqualified, and the Kohen is priest, would be guilty of a transgression. In certain cases where an offering was brought in a state of impurity, the zitz made it acceptable to God. So what's he talking about here? Well, one thing that I forgot to mention was the blue, the techelet. We'll talk about more of that in the zitzit, or in the talit. But now this part right here where the priest had to be ritually pure, this is part of where we had the laver of water, and they would go and they would wash their hands, and they would look in the water and they would see the reflection. So they were always looking for blemishes to make sure that they were pure before they went and did any service before God. So additionally, Rashi goes on to say, he says, our sages state that the zitz positioned on the Kohen Gadol's, on the high priest's forehead, brought about divine pardon for the sin of impudence, known in the Hebrew as azut panim, and that means hardness of the face. This panim is another one of those wonderful words that it has the I am on the end, the im, which makes it plural, but the word is face. So we know that there is only one Elohim, one God, one face, panim. This is what's interesting about Hebrew, is that there's several places where a plural word is used, but there's only one because there's a unity. There's anyway. So the term forehead is also used in Jeremiah 3:3, referring to impudence, and here it's in the Aramaic, and the term is tokva de mitzcha, or hardness of the forehead. Now, to go a little bit deeper here, we're going to get what some people scary a little more. We're going to make some reference to the Zohar. Ooh. Don't get spooky on me, right? So the Zohar describes how this worked, and the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, he could observe whether the words inscribed on the zitz, those words, holy to God, were reflected, listen to this now, listen carefully, reflected on the face of the person standing before him. Remember, gold is reflective. And so there's something spiritual happening here that's is really, really astonishing. If so that meant that the person was righteous and deserving of a share in the world to come. So what you're saying is they're coming before God, they're bringing their sacrifice, not necessarily because they've sinned, but because what does sacrifice mean? It means korban. The word korban means to draw near. So again, people are coming to draw near to God, and he comes, you're bringing your sacrifice. The high priest meets you, looks upon your face, and if he sees the reflection of holy to God, holy unto God in your face, you have a spot in the world to come. Wow. Yeah. That's amazing to me. That's really, really amazing. And so if he didn't see that reflection, then the Kohen Gadol knew that this person was impudent. You see, you can't get anything past God. All right. And you can't get it. And so the high priest would pray to God and ask God for him to have mercy on this person and to forgive him. So now, as I was studying this, I found some interesting things, and there's some interesting history as it goes to with the zitz and then some other things that are in the tabernacle. And the zitz played a key role, and there's some midrash on this, some commentary on this. During the war with the Midianites, the Jewish people, you remember we learn about Balaam a little bit later on, how he tries to curse Israel. And then later on, we read about how he dies in battle with Midianites. Well, there is a point in there where it says that Balaam was using sorcery, so to speak, and he was flying over and he was helping people to, he was helping the Midianites to basically be encouraged, like, whoa, he's spiritual, he's flying over them. And Pincus, the high priest, he has that zitz on his forehead, holy unto God. He looks up at Balaam, and Balaam falls to the earth, and then they have the battle, and they win the battle. It's one of those interesting little stories that's in there, and it's just wonderful. And also, after the battle with the Midianites was all over, remember what happened was Balaam also tried to use, he told him, he says, you want to get Israel? Send your Midianite women, send your women over to entice them, and they will fall. And so you remember we have the whole Pincus thrusting a Midianite through in front of the tent of meeting and all that zealousness. We learned about that stuff later on, and we learned about it last year. And so all this is going on. So they also use that golden zitz. He went around to every one of these Midianite women to find out which ones were ones that enticed Israelites to sin. Interesting, isn't it? So Now, here's something that's even more interesting when we start looking into the history of this, is that after the Romans destroyed the Second Temple, all of its treasuries, all of the treasures and all of the accessories, everything was brought to Rome. And this is why there is still a legend today as to why they believe that behind the walls of Vatican are hidden the menorah and everything else. And the zeets, yes, is one of those things. As a matter of fact, Rabbi Eleazar of that time period, he was the son of Yosei. He says, I saw the zeets in Rome, and the words holy to God were inscribed on it on one line. So here he was, here's a rabbi of that day and age, and it was actually after the destruction of the Second Temple. He was in Rome and he saw this piece. Amazing, isn't it? So finally, let me finish with just this one part before we'll talk a little bit about this. The zeets also symbolizes the Messiah, who is described as eagerly awaiting God's call to come and redeem us from exile. As a matter of fact, when we look in the Song of Solomon, let me make sure I got the right verse for you. Yes, the Song of Songs in 2:9, it talks about that he's standing behind our wall, looking from the windows, peering mekazitz. There's that word again, from the lattices. So now the zitz was worn by the Kohen Gadol on the forehead, and the forehead represents willpower that is higher than intellect. So if you remember, so let's think about this. Okay, so what's the forehead? The forehead is that area, part of this that surrounds the skull, and it protects the brain. And the brain is, and this forehead, it's above the face, and the face is the part where we show our emotions. And so this represents our will, our ratzon. You can see a lot of the similarities of the zits being thrown around in here. And so again, this is stuff is no mistake. This is a holy language. Okay, it's powerful. When you start looking at these stuffs and you start digging into it, you realize just how everything is so connected and interwoven. Okay, I'm getting a little excited, so to be careful, stay on track here. But so this represents our will, our ratzon, which is, it's before and it's higher than our emotional or our intellectual capabilities. So a person with a hard forehead, as explained to you back in Jeremiah 3, was it 3 something? It was in Jeremiah. I thought I had it written down. But as a person with a hard forehead is someone who does not submit to higher authority. So you can see now the zeets that was worn on the Kohen Gadol's forehead, and the forehead represents the willpower that is higher than intellect. Then we learn that we can bring Messiah by developing a total trust, bitachon, trust in God. And even when the situation is hopeless, according to human logic on how we think. Now, let me finish with just the few minutes that we have. I have my tallit on, and the tallit is my little sanctuary. It's a vestment, so to speak. It's a prayer shawl. We can pray with my head covered, so to speak. Don't get me wrong. Somehow, somewhere along the line, people have learned that for some reason we're not supposed to pray with our head covered, but that's not what Paul was talking about. And he's talking about having a covering. You have to have God over you, God over your you over your family, so to speak. So that's the covering he's kind of talking that he's talking about. He's not talking about this. Remember, Paul was a tent maker, a talit maker. He was a little translation, and many commentators believe that is what it's talking about. So we're under a little tent, and so no laughing about my baldness. You can really see how intellectual I am because of my forehead. So I have even more forehead to submit to God. Poor me, you should be saying. I have even more that I have to work on than other people do. But the talit is one of these things. It's another one of these things. So why do we do what we do with these things? Because they are a physical reminder of a spiritual thing that God wants us to learn about. So God wants us to remember, you're right, Catherine, prayers. So these things, so like when we go in our little sanctuary and remember these things, so like this part right here, this, see how it's kind of a corner on my talit? It's called the kanaf. In the King James Version, you may see it represent, it's called a skirt. In the book of Ruth, it says that Boaz put out his skirt to Ruth. It was this part right here. It was basically saying that he was committing himself as far as commandments. And so where do we get the commandments part of this as a reminder of the commandments? That's in this right here, the zit. Again, here's that zit word in there, isn't there? So what we have here is talit, the numerical value of it is 600. And then you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 knots. That's 605. And then the strings here of the fringes are wrapped around 8 times 613. How many commandments are there? There's 613. So you see right there, these physical reminders to help us to obey God's commandments, to pray. And so when we're stepping before God and praying, we have these physical reminders to help us to remember those things. And so I hope you've enjoyed what we're talking about here today. And we're out of time. And I hope that you truly have blessings, received blessings from this, and may God and may the Lord bless you and keep you, and the Lord make His face shine upon you and be gracious to you, and the Lord turn His face toward you and give you peace. Thank you for watching.